Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine, and I am a compulsive overeater. And it's lovely to be with you this morning. I'm just going to read a little prayer from my little book, and it is very tiny, and it's just to ground me because I can get carried away with myself. And the prayer is called Do the Right Thing. So help me, higher power, to get out of myself, to stop always thinking of what I need. Show me the way that I can be helpful to others and supply me with the strength to do the right thing. So that's nice and easy. Okay, so I know I'm among friends, and it's lovely to be with you all this morning. And thank you, everybody that's here, and just such an amazing meeting. Um, so just to sort of start off that, and to qualify that I am a compulsive overeater. And when I first arrived in the rooms, prior to that, I was topping the scales at 25 stone. And I sort of lost a bit before I arrived in. So I'm fairly sure it was about 23 maybe when I got here. And sort of for our friends in the US, that's probably about 322 pounds or thereabouts. Um, and to date, I have handed over, with the help of higher power, about £138 roughly. Um, so, um, that has been a life-changing amount. It really has. To the point that it sort of it made my life so much easier for getting around. Um, for being able to take part in things that really prior to that I just didn't do. It was easier to shield myself away and to just keep myself, just from feeling like I was going to be harmed by maybe, not fitting in the right chair, breaking furniture, because I'd done all these things before, and it isn't a nice place to be. We've all heard the stories of all the things that we've done with food, and I have been there and I've done them as well. But I would also, really like to concentrate on the solution and what made me well. And I think the biggest thing for me was realizing, that my disease, you know, is permanent, it is progressive, um, and it's fatal if I don't do anything about, kind of improving it. And the reason I know it's fatal is because, 5 years ago, my aunt died of this disease at the age of 59. She was still a young woman. Um, and, we were quite close in age considering she was my aunt. And she topped the scales at over 30 stone, bless her. And I think that had a profound effect on me and sort of made me kind of realize that, had I not started to think about a solution, I would be heading down the same route. um and I think one of the big things for me also was realizing that, the disease gets worse, it never gets better. And I know for me, having diabetes type 2, my HbA1c was at one point up to 92. Sorry, yeah, 92. I think it was 92. And more recently, my latest bloods are coming in, and I am now in pre-diabetic range. So I think the big thing is remembering that, if I do the right thing, carry out the right action, do, do the work through my steps, um, you know, it can work and it does work. But I think also, the big thing for me was knowing and remembering and also relapsing and knowing that I will pursue this disease, and many of us have, to the gates of insanity. And it tells us that in the big book. And, you know, um, thinking whenever I first became abstinent and had 18 months of abstinence, I had this sorted. I knew exactly what I was doing. But, I heard somebody recently share that their weight knew exactly where to find them again if they ever turned, their back on their program. And I definitely can vouch for that, because as soon as I started to, you know, cut back on meetings, not take the daily action that I needed, um, the weight soon found me again. And I have had things go wrong through my recovery. I lost my brother very suddenly at the age of 56. You know, through sort of weight related and addiction related issues. And I also, lost my dad last year. So, recovery isn't plain sailing. And I think it's times like that we need to realize that we need to sort of double down on our recovery. I just didn't do that at the time and thought, oh, I'll be fine and everything will be great. And it just isn't. So relapse taught me that I can't take my foot off the gas. As soon as I do that, I'm screwed. So I had to, concede to my innermost self that I am an alcoholic when it comes to food. So the first step in my recovery was acceptance and realizing that I can't do this alone, that I need every single one of you people in this room. I need my God squad. You're God with skin on, lots and lots of lovely people in here. And you're the people that hold the mirror up and tell me when I'm not doing what I should be doing. If I ask for advice, I know I'll get it. Um, I don't usually call it advice. I usually just say, could you share your experience, strength, and hope in this? And people will do that, and they will say, look, why don't you think about this or that? Or, I would kindly suggest, is one of my friends' favorite ways of describing what I should be doing when I'm probably not doing it. Um, so I think the other thing for me is realizing what entire abstinence means to me. Um, and I know that my abstinence looks different to others, and that's okay. There's no two of us in this room that do exactly the same thing. Um, and I think it's remembering that. So just to say, I have a sponsor who I work with. I do sponsor others, and I'm really grateful, as I say, to have a beautiful squad of people around me who are there when I need them. And just to talk about the things that I do daily to keep myself well. Um, and one of the first things I think is to say that I do daily meditation and prayer. It doesn't always happen first thing in the morning. I have a chronic illness that sometimes prevents that from being the case. So I pick up where I can. So if I'm not sleeping and I'm lying in a bit, well then I start when I get up. I have tight boundaries around my food, so I don't put myself in harm's way if I'm feeling a bit vulnerable. So to me, that means things like, initially when I came in and I needed to kind of go through the hospitalization period, I didn't have things like, um, you know, Bangor Eats, for example. I'm from Bangor, so it's like an app for buying food online, instead of having going and picking it up or whatever. So I had to remove stuff like that from my phone. Don't use Uber Eats, things like that, just so I knew that I couldn't always reach for my phone and order stuff, because that was where I went to in my illness. Also, remembering that through the steps and everything else, I had this psychic change, and knowing that I don't have to use the food in the way that I did. Also, sort of a strict moral code. So, I try and practice the steps and, practice the principles in all my affairs. So that's all parts of life. It's not just around my food. And every day I ask higher power, what's your will for me today? Um, and I think that's the big thing before program. I ran on self-will. God had very little place in my life, and certainly I didn't ask God for guidance, that's for sure, because at that stage I was running the show. But I'm grateful that that's not the case anymore. I outreach with fellows daily, and my sponsor likes me to I reach with 2 people every day if possible. So I do that. And some days I do better than others. Other days I might do, one, and other days I might do three, other days I might do none. But I do try and do, depending on what's going on. So 2 calls is what I aim for. Um, I also believe that it was through outreach that I sort of was kind of um found and invited into the program, as it were. I'd sort of heard about OA and had the seed planted firmly many years ago, and was offended that somebody would think that I would need to use a program such as OA. You know, why would they think I needed that? Sitting at 25 stone, I felt offended. Why would they tell me about OA? It's amazing how offended I could get, and I certainly yeah, took a while to kind of get that seed to grow into something. But yeah, so just to say that the search and rescue, I really and truly believe was somebody who felt that they would outreach to me when I put my name and number in a meeting. And that person really did, kind of come about and reach out to me and sort of say, look, this is the program, this is what we do. And in actual fact, that person ended up being my first sponsor. So, don't underestimate the power of that call, and I think sometimes we think, oh, I'll not bother, I'll not do that. But honestly, it can mean life and death to people. And that is, what I firmly believe. Gratitudes is a big one for me, being thankful for what I have rather than, looking at all the things that I haven't got. And, prior to program, I certainly would have believed I had nothing worth, um, being thankful for, I attend meetings and have service positions in some of the meetings that I attend, not all of them, but some of them. Um, I do a nightly review every day for my sponsor. And in that nightly review, I include my gratitudes. And that's sort of like a daily barometer for my sponsor to, be able to say, right, okay, I read this, what happened there, you know, let me know how you're feeling, as regards this, or do you need a call? And it's just a lovely way for her to see what's going on in my life at any given time. I also commit my food to my sponsor. So usually the night before, I send her what I'm going to have the next day. And that does require a bit of planning on my part. But that's what's needed to keep me well. And I know that doesn't work for everybody. And, that's okay. This is what I need to do to keep me well. I read with recovered fellows. So I have a wee God squad and, I read with them from maybe a brown book or, maybe Drop the Rock or whatever. We read a multitude of books on recovery and, we all sort of read a paragraph at a time. And I do that. It's sort of, we try and do it 7 days a week, and it's only, between 5 and 8 minutes. It's not like a whole hour's worth of reading. And, I try and do at least 5 nights out of 7. I don't get them all, I have to say. Um, Also, I work on my character defects. And a big one for me is, people pleasing and what people think of me. And really that shouldn't matter. But you know, I still have to work on that one. And I have a really dear friend in recovery who always said to me, it's none of your business what people think of you. And I remember thinking she was really rude, not really understanding what she meant by the it's none of your business. To me, when I was growing up, it's none of your business was a rebuke, where she meant, like, you don't need to worry about that. People will think what they're going to think regardless of what you know, so worrying about it, and me thinking, oh, I can't control that. So me thinking that I can is just immaterial. And I have to forgive myself, so that my daily amends to myself, I forgive myself, and I try and protect my peace. And I think forgiving myself around, things like, how I was with my children when they were smaller. I made amends to all these people and did the best I could. And I think it's just remembering that in all of this, I'm human. I'm not superhuman. And I just have to keep remembering, the love that my higher power has for me and try and spread that love elsewhere. So thank you, folks. And it's been a pleasure being with you this morning.